Please. Could you have the microphone so that not only I hear you, this goes into the recording as well. Is not working. Okay, I'll repeat your question for the sake of recording. Yeah.
Until recently, has anyone contributed to this Natyashastra, or is it allowed to contribute now to add to the works of Natyashastra?
All right, the question is anybody allowed to contribute now, and what have been the recent contributions, and what about the ancient ones? Now, there is a very detailed description of this that I give in my book. Let me be a salesman of my book for a minute. Dramatic Concepts, Greek and Indian. It's available at the Karnataka Music House in your city. And I have here a chapter which goes into a big detail of this. It is somewhere page 32 or so, the Natya Shastra as a compilation. And I discuss in detail the issue. Is it a compilation? Is it the work of a single person? Is it something which was written just within one part of the country? Or is it something which came from different parts of the country? All these issues are discussed here. But let me tell you briefly. Now, the tradition has it very clear that the Natya Shastra, which consists of presently 6,000 verses, is called Shat Sahasri. That is, it has 6,000 shlokas or karikas in it, and it is a reduction of an earlier text called Dwadash Sahasri, which had 12,000 verses. Now, this is one thing that we hear. Whether it is true or not, we cannot say, because we don't have manuscripts of the 12,000. However, in the Indian academic tradition, we talk about two kinds of movements. One is called Vyas, or expansion, and the other is called Samas. You all know that the Mahabharata was called Jaya, and then Jaya became Bharat, and Bharat became Mahabharata. So this is the task of the Vyas, where it expands. Vyasa is a person who expands. How does he expand? By creating something new, by bringing in other traditions, by compiling various versions and quotes. And then when something becomes very big, then you reduce it. You say, let me have the essential part of it. So then that is called Samas. So this is one. Then there is also the idea that there was a Brahma Mat, there was a Shaiva Mat, there was a Hanumat Mat, there was a Mat of Nandi and Tandu. There were various acharyas who were writing on different parts of the Natya Shastra. In the first chapter, the Utpatti chapter, which I am going to talk about now, all these issues are taken up. And what is called here as the 100 sons of Bharat, in other words, the disciple, Manasputra, not the bodily sons, but the mental or the sons in the tradition, like you are the sons and daughters of Kalakshetra, it's a tradition. So they also contributed to it. Obviously, this is something which does not bother the traditional people. As I said a minute ago, it only bothers those who are from cultures where you have single authorship, single person authorship. It's taken for granted that almost all these Shastras are a redaction, a compilation of many other. For instance, if you go to Arthashastra, then he talks of different authors who have contributed to the ideas of Arthashastra. It's not just Kautilya. How can it be recent? For almost 1,000 years, we have not studied our text. There have been no universities in India. The last university burned to ground was Nalanda in the 13th century. And they are trying to recreate and make another Nalanda. God knows what kind of Nalanda they'll make, because there are no people who are studying texts now. So it's actually a wild goose chase, with due respect to great names. If there has been no study, rigorous study of Indian texts for several hundred years, how could have people contributed? Yes, people have written different works, and there is a long line of works throughout medieval times. But then these works are about a particular art form in a particular region. The Natya Shastra, as we'll go along, we'll see, covers the whole of the country. It talks about the whole triangle called India today. It talks about what people like in the south, what they like in the east, what they like in west. And it gives descriptions, and it gives regions, and it names everything. So it was an all India text. That way, there has not been, as a matter of any major contribution. As a matter of fact, it's in 1925 or 30 that the text of Abhinava Bharati was rediscovered. When people started making sense out of the technical terms of Natya Shastra. And also, the living tradition of theatre disappeared a long time ago. We have had theatre in parts of India, what is now called by Sangeet Natak Academy as the regional theatre. You know, Jatra and Bhavai and Kudiyattam. But an all India theatre has not existed for a very long time, because the political situation did not allow it. Islam does not allow theatre, it's not permitted. Just as early Christianity did not allow theatre to flourish in Greece and was responsible for the extermination of classical Greek theatre. So for a large number of ideological and political reasons, if the art form was not practiced, then how could there be a Shastra for it? Because the Shastra is related only to the practice. You see, just as we have one term called Shastra, we have another term called Lakshya. And earlier in the talk, I was telling you that every Shastra is for an application. Now what is that application? That application is Lakshya. So the purpose of Nat Shastra is to perform a theatrical, musical, literary performance, and that is called a Lakshya. And Natya Shastra is written for the Lakshya of Natya or theatre. Theatre in its widest sense. Now, if that art form has become subdued, or if it has been just regionalized, then you are not going to have a big flourishing Shastra with fresh contribution. When you read the Nat Shastra, then you would find that in every second or third chapter, Bharat Muni, the compiler, author, progenitor, whatever word you may want to use, he says that I am giving you all these lakshanas or characteristics of how they perform this particular thing. If I have left out anything, please include it. Many people will come around and tell you that Nat Shastra is only prescription. It says do this and don't do more. No, that's not true. It's the other way around. We'll read out those verses which says if I have left out, if I have not observed this, and if you have observed something else, please put it in. Now, in spite of this invitation which was made 2,500 years ago, in my opinion, this text finished its compilation in 400 to 500 BC, not AD, as is very frequently thought. This is a text which is referred, technical terms have been taken from this text in Valmiki Ramayana and Mahabharata. Some of the oldest texts, and one day we'll go through those terms, So, in spite of that invitation, this has not happened. Yes, it has grown over centuries. We know that it has, and we are glad that it has. But as I said, that when the actual performance of theatre, all India theatre, came to an end, then contributions could not have been made. So if you use the text again on an all India basis, then you will be able to make contributions and add to it again. There is nothing in this which forbids it.
I have a question. It is quite, for most of us, we get confused with the term called Shastra itself. Like, for argument's sake, that we have been exposed to a text like we have been prescribed a text by Natya Shastra.
It's not clear, your sound, yeah. Yeah, could you just repeat the question?
There are many texts which we speak, like Natya Shastra and Abhinay Darpan or whatsoever it is, like
Yes.
Sangeeta Ratnakara, many texts.
Yes.
Like, what is the demarcating line between a Shastra and vis-a-vis other texts? Like, what is a Shastra actually? In the Indian plethora of Shastra study, like, how do you define a Shastra? And where does Natya Shastra is classified in the entire genre of Shastras in Indian literature? Because this question of Natya Shastra and their reflective texts like Abhinay Darpan or any other, or even Natya Darpan or something like that, how do you differentiate between such
Between
kind
the
of
two.
texts?
Well,
And
yeah.
as you also rightly answered that anyone can contribute to a original Shastra, is it true that these texts could be contributed, or there is any a kind of a qualification to become a Shastrin, to contribute to a text?
All right, now here. First of all, the problem, should Abhinay Darpan be called a Shastra or not? Huh? Of course, because it is talking about Abhinay. It is giving you how to perform Abhinay within a context. We know that it belongs to a time frame and there are texts that come before. So certainly, even if it is not called Shastra, if it is called Darpana, Abhinay Darpana, then that does not disqualify it from being called a Shastra. It's, you see, naming is sometimes a matter of fashion also. There was a time when lots of people would use the word Kaumudi and Shringara Kaumudi, Bhava Kaumudi, this, and they would use that word. Similarly, when a text even though if it is not called a Shastra, fulfills the primary condition which I gave you, Shastram iti shasanopayam, then it is a Shastra. One. The second question actually gets answered by the first, because if you don't make that distinction, then you don't say that here was Nat Shastra, a closed body of text, and whatever does not fall into Nat Shastra is not a Shastra. So I make a submission to both of your questions that no, it is not true. Technically, if somebody writes a manual today in English as to how you should perform Bharatnatyam, technically that also is a Shastra. And I think there is a text called Abhinavanatya Shastra by an Acharya written about 50 years ago. I don't have right now the full details of it, but I do recall reading that work several 2-3 decades ago. So you can write it again. If you write it in Sanskrit, then people will readily accept it as a Shastra. But if you look at the spirit of it, anything which makes it possible for us to practice, revive, and transmit the lakshanas, the characteristics of an art form, then that is a Shastra. You can be loud and I'll repeat the question so that it goes into the record. Yeah. Was it one person or was it many persons? Now, of course, there were many Bharatas, and one is sitting right before you. But different Bharatas don't come into the context here. Like the younger brother of Ram, Bharat, for our purpose, he is not there. Now, the term Bharata has been used for the performer, the one who is also called a nata, a dancer, actor, musician, performer. He is also being called Bharata. So it is a term related to profession. And sometimes when somebody becomes very famous in a particular profession, then he becomes the most eminent of that. And then that name of the profession becomes his or her name. In here, the compiler or the composer of the text is called Bharata Muni. You see, I always get irritated when people just keep on saying Bharata, Bharata. No, there is a distinction between just the word Bharat and Bharata Muni. Bharata Muni is the compiler of Natya Shastra, the one who did this great work. And sometimes he is just called Muni. Abhinav Bharati and several other texts, they just called him Munina Uktam. That is just said by Bharat. So, Muni is actually not a family name. It is denotative of a status of a person. Munis are called the Manasputra or the mental putras of Brahma. Those who have reached that high level of intellect, that they can be called the sons of Brahma. So therefore they are Munis. Like Narada is a Muni, and they are not supposed to be just born out of human beings. They are supposed to be born out of Brahma. Now, don't take all these things very literally. Take the deeper meaning that it is a level of great expanse, it is a level of intellectual excellence, and therefore Bharata Muni is different from the ordinary Bharata. People who, perform, or people like me who talk. That is one level of Bharat. And this is Bharat Muni who did this great job of putting this thing together and transmitting it and having such a large number of disciples and making it something which goes down the generation. Any more questions? Yes. Could you be louder? Why? Oh, are not included in art because they are disgusting. Because they talk of something which we see all the time on road shows and everywhere. Because they don't elevate you. Because you don't remember them maybe a week later. There is a difference between art and life. Just representing life is not art. It may be sensation. Please reflect upon this. You are all artists. Reflect upon the very question, what is art? What am I doing? Is this what I am doing? If I am doing this, am I not doing something else? Am I preparing myself to do something? So, you must look upon what is art and what is not art. It's a very crucial question, not just in the context of Natya Shastra, but in the context of any art form, painting or poetry or whatever. And one thing we must understand, that just a pictorial representation or just a film representation of things just as they are in life is not art. Documentation is not art. Now this video would be just a documentation of this discussion or a lecture. You can't call it an artistic creation. You understand? Art is an entirely different process. And Natya Shastra is going to tell you about that. When the question session is over, that's exactly what we will talk about. How, yes. Indra.